Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed their lunch. Had a bit going on this week, particularly Dan.
Yes.
I think it's worth us having a bit of a chat firstly, start off and discuss, I guess, the events in Parliament this week from a resource perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jackie. And I know that you're referring to the mining bill, which has been a significant body of work. And I should really acknowledge, I want to acknowledge that the previous government started this body of work. The Marshall Liberal government has taken it up and evolved it further, put some extra improvements in it. People from the Department of Energy and Mining have been working incredibly hard on this with with both governments and through the transition. And yes, so Wednesday night, around about 11 o'clock, the mining bill passed the lower house of Parliament. There's a sense of relief in that, but I have to really make it clear it's only the first step. As you would all know, you need to get any legislation through both houses of Parliament, and we now have only one more complete Parliament week split over 2 weeks physically with estimates in the middle, and then 4 weeks without Parliament before that bill would have the opportunity to come back to the upper house. So, you know, we've got a ways to go with regard to work, with regard to time, but fingers crossed it will work through. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say on that, please, Jackie, is this bill is an enormous amount of very, very good work. It gives both the resources sectors and the agriculture sector new benefits that don't exist at the moment. But both sectors want more benefits than are on the table at the moment, and the government's decision has been to try to lock in this half a step forward, give everybody those benefits, and then get back to work, and then take the next phase of the evolution of our Mining Act.
Thanks, Dan. I think it's, and we'll get onto it later in the discussion today with a bit of a focus on sustainability, because that obviously would help, I think, all parties to agree to a prosperous future for South Australia would coexist agriculture and resources. So we will touch on that later through the discussion.
Great.
Thanks very much for that, Dan. David, over to you. Critical minerals. I believe you're a key driver in putting together this strategy document that was recently launched by the Australian Government and Austrade. Would you like to give the audience a bit of an overview on critical minerals and they're the context for our discussion today, so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jackie. I think you might have given me a little bit too much credit, but I'll take it. Critical minerals, an interesting concept, a highly subjective phenomena. And it's only fitting that we discuss this on the celebration of the 4th of July, because the real driver for this was President Trump's executive order of the 22nd of December 2017, which in many respects jolted the world to start looking at critical minerals a little bit more closely. Australia has enormous competitive advantages. For example, with regards to building lithium-ion batteries, we have commercial scale production of 9 of the 10 core mineral elements. Ironically, the one we don't have is graphite, which South Australia has the most plentiful resource deposits of. Following that, going back to the 2017 decision, we had former Prime Minister Turnbull in the United States for the National Governors Association meetings, and he and President Trump agreed to cooperate. So that set the platform for the Commonwealth Government, in conjunction with our discussions with states and territories, to start taking a closer look at that. Mm-hmm. So that's the well springs of where this was driven from. At a Commonwealth level, there's been very close interest in this from Austrade, but also from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, most importantly, the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. Also with our geological agency, Geoscience Australia. So the policy was put together. It was announced earlier this year before the federal election. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. It's available online. It is more of a document of intent, and we are hoping that the Commonwealth Government will be able to work more closely with states and territories on how we can advance opportunities in this sector.
That's fantastic. And reading through that, you call on a lot of the key principles which talk about the strengths in the Australian sector from a resource perspective. Deep experience, great met sector, supportive government, both from a state and federal perspective. Dan, I'm interested in your perspectives. How does South Australia stack up through that lens, and what do you think South Australia has to offer?
Well, unsurprisingly, I think we have a lot to offer. We know this is where the world trend is going. We know that these critical minerals or these emerging minerals or these green minerals, there are different terms used, are going to become more and more important. We are fortunate to be, have the capacity to be a good supplier of them. We've got 65% of Australia's known copper reserves. We've got 80% of Australia's known reserves and I'm just trying to think of that one, I apologise, largest zircon mine in the world. And look, we are well placed, but we're also very well placed because we can produce renewable energy better than most people in the world. And that's caused us a lot of grief in South Australia, the electricity prices, the volatility and all that sort of thing. But we're in another piece of work, we're determined to fix that. But as well as the minerals, consumers around the world, whether they be corporates or governments, they want the minerals to be produced as cleanly as possible. So we have a big head start in South Australia in that regard as well, which we need to make the very, very most of.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that draws on an important point, and I know it's been discussed in the copper industry for some time about green copper and there being a premium. Andrew, is that something you're hearing more about when you talk to your end customers?
Look, it absolutely is, and not just our end customers, but our shareholders. So our shareholders are scattered all across the world, and they are increasingly not just asking but demanding that they have line of sight over where their products come from. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. So I think, as the Minister said, South Australia is in a fantastic position, but it's not going to be straightforward. We're well endowed with great resources. We're well endowed with sun and wind and those types of things, but we're not quite there in the position, I don't think, to actually make the most of all of these components to put it together into a competitive advantage. And I think there's still work to be done. But to give an example, I think, of how the edge we've got, we ran an Explorer Challenge just recently where we opened up exploration data to the world. And that data went to over 60 countries, 1,000 different organisations. And we judged those submissions last week. And I can tell you, overwhelmingly, the best submissions were from Australia, unanimously. So just in terms of complexity, dealing with multiple layers of information, the difference in thinking that went into that. So we really do have a competitive edge, but we need to work out how to apply it, I think.
Yeah, there you go. I thought that was an Australian competition when I saw the first and second place getters, and maybe even a South Australian one when you consider
there is
how they
one
did.
group here, I think.
Yes,
in the room,
I think
actually.
there is. Yeah, fantastic. But more on sustainability. I mean, we had farmers and pastoralists on the steps of Parliament House. We had people with perspectives around how the resource industry impacts their livelihood. For you and Andrew, what needs to change when we look forward to being a sustainable partner in the global future of South Australia? What do we need to do better, and what support has to occur at government level?
Well, a couple of things, and it's 80% of Australia's graphite, by the way. I apologise, that slipped my mind a second ago. But I think better understanding is one of the key things. I think we need to make sure that both sectors, whether it's resources or agriculture, understand each other's needs. We have to also accept that it's not a one or the other situation. It's not this is a cropping area, so we don't do mines here. That's not going to work. South Australia has been underperforming for a long time with regard to its economic progress. There is a lot of latent capacity in our state that we need to develop. Our government, the Premier Marshal, is determined to develop. That won't happen if it's an us or them, or do that over there and that over there. It needs to be resources and agriculture. Now, there's a couple of quick things that come to mind. I mean, the resources sector broadly understands this, but not everybody, I think, focuses on as much as they could. Most people don't live at the mines. Most people do live on the farms. So, there is a totally different way of looking not only at what you do, but what the other people do as well. And it should never, ever be underestimated how important that living on your farm part is from a farmer's perspective. So it's not just interfering potentially or even not interfering with the crops you grow or the wool or the beef or the whatever it is. It's actually, you're going to be right here in my home patch is a very important thing. And the other thing I'd say, and this is perhaps a little bit provocative, but particularly at the lower end of the exploration side of the industry, some operators need to lift their game because, and there are lots of tremendous, responsible, very, very good explorers, no problem at all. But if somebody who doesn't fit that description knocks on a farmhouse door and that engagement goes poorly, the whole district then turns off to mining. It's not like you bought a Commodore and you were disappointed, so you drive Falcons for the rest of your life. If you get somebody from Western Australia coming into your home patch, not doing it the right way, that farmer then writes off the entire industry, BHP and Oz Minerals and everybody in their mind. They don't go, oh, next time I'll just deal with a responsible explorer, because the knowledge isn't there, the understanding isn't there. So there's a couple of things I think we need to do.
Thanks, Dan. And Andrew, from your perspective, I mean, you said you're hearing from not just your customers but your shareholders around their expectation of your company delivering to high standards. What does the future look like from a sustainability perspective for Oz Minerals?
Can I just park that, Jackie? I'd like to add something
Please.
to what the Minister has said, because I agree with everything the Minister's outlined. I think too often this debate about whether it should be mining or agriculture is about one or the other, and it comes down to personal preferences and loud voices as opposed to a recognition that it's not one or the other. We need to eat, we need resources, we just need to do it together in a sustainable way. And too often I think it comes down to a debate about one or the other, so I completely agree with that. The only other thing I would add is in a world where we're very connected and every voice can be made very loud, we do need to be very careful that we don't respond to the minority of populations whose voices are getting louder and louder and can overwhelm conversations. So I think with the debate about farming or mining, quite often it comes down to an emotive debate versus a rational debate, and those two don't always gel. So trying to get the emotion across both and get the rationality across both, and working through listening to the general populace, not the loud extreme at one end or the other, is very important. And I think it's something in a society like today is very difficult to do, because those voices get amplified very loudly around the place, and political parties can respond to the loud voices, not the populist ones. So I think it's a very difficult thing that we all need to weigh up. But I completely echo the things the Minister has said today about we need to lift our game as an industry. The reputation of our industry needs work, and that needs to come from us. So there's absolutely no denying that. But I also think it's not just an industry challenge, it is a multi-sector challenge, because this argument doesn't just happen between mining and agriculture, it happens across multiple sectors.
Indeed.
Yep.
In terms of sustainability, I think this is a very large part of what actually makes an organisation sustainable. In our view, and I'm talking about from an Oz Minerals perspective here, we are spending an awful lot more time talking about organisational culture and how we work with our stakeholders than anything else. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about what we do, mining copper and costs and things like those, because our people technically are very good at that and they do it naturally. The things they're not naturally good at are dealing really well with stakeholder groups. How do you work with a farmer? How do you engage that farmer? How do you actually make them an ambassador of your mining operation? That's a really difficult thing to do, and technical people just generally aren't very good at it. So we need to help them learn how to do that. So that's where we spend most of our time. And I think for society is demanding line of sight over where their products come from. And there's no difference between when you buy your eggs and you want to see that it comes from chickens who have free range, as to when you buy your vehicle and you want to make sure that it hasn't been built through slave labour or child labour. So society is increasingly demanding that. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity in South Australia and Australia to really push that. But I think it needs policy settings and industry to drive it, because it won't happen on its own.
Correct.
Thanks, Andrew. David, from your perspective, I mean, you've written the papers there, laying out the strategy for federal and state governments to work together. What do you see as being one of the key levers to help the industry move forward?
Look, I'm going to do what Andrew did and ask to park that.
Sure.
And just leverage off what he said.
Go for it.
Look, interesting point on the ethical supply side. recently took a business delegation through Japan and Korea, and they're the first murmurings coming out of the large Japanese trading houses about where they source their cobalt from. There's been a bit written about blood cobalt. As an Australian government representative, I wasn't playing that down. But I was interested to note that some of the boards of these large trading houses are starting to look at alternative supply. Whether or not you're a believer in technology or not, blockchain could make a difference here. It's quite possible that you'll be able to tell from within a quarter of a metre of a mine site where a particular mineral element came from that's used to manufacture your car. There are some drivers which are going to start pushing ethical supply. This, again, is something which we're very good at, but we also need to get better at. So it's something we need to focus on. I note the challenges here at a state level, they are national, but I'm very encouraged to hear that you have a minister who's very committed to addressing this, and also the head of one of your largest mining companies who's very much got this at the front of his mind. So moving on to the other work, let's just take it back a step. What we're talking about here are critical minerals. Now, copper is probably the most important critical mineral. We haven't used it in much of the work we've done so far because it's commoditised. There are no supply constraints. There's free and easy access to copper, but copper is going to be at the heart of the next generation of technology and the next generation of industrial development. What we've put together is a list of 24 critical minerals defined by the end use and their necessity to economies and industries of the future in advanced economies. So we're talking about renewable energy, we're talking about defence, we're talking about aviation, we're talking about anything which has an industrial magnet or potentially a lithium-ion battery at the heart of what it does.
Or anything with a screen.
Anything with a screen. And if you looked around this room and someone a bit more, you'd probably be the best person in the room, Jackie, to go around and say, right, where is a rare earth element in this room? And we'd probably waste half an hour doing that. But just as an illustration, it's in everything we do, it will become more a part of what we do. Some of these critical minerals you don't need much of. You might need not much more than a teaspoon of hafnium or something which you need for the manufacture of a MiG aircraft or something like that, which can make it lighter. Why is this important now? It's because there are risks around supply chains and there are also risks around security of supply. So there are some issues, particularly around rare earths, both heavy and light rare earths, where Australia has the world's third largest geological endowment, but we're also the second largest global producer. The largest producer is China, which is accountable for around 90% or 85%, depending whose data you're using. Anyone who's studied economics know that there's a bit of a risk in that. So there's an opportunity for us to try and ramp up what we're doing across all critical minerals, but with a particular focus on rare earths. So in terms of the way forward, what we'd like to do is to start looking at how, from a Commonwealth government point of view, we can look at what's happening in particular states and territories, how we can direct Commonwealth assistance. And there are a number of financial instruments that the Commonwealth has access to, so that they can be targeted more effectively to make more of a difference to the particular project economics of a mining project. We were discussing over lunch, Jackie, the importance of getting in place agreements between miners and end users before they can actually proceed to get a bankable feasibility study or indeed get debt finance for a project. So offtake has become the key word in critical minerals. And I'm talking to it, sitting next to the CEO of a large mining company. You know this, Andrew, but particularly when you start getting into the smaller critical minerals, there is risk around price. The economics of the global rare earths market tells us that a bank is going to be a little bit concerned when there are historical examples of prices falling through the floor on rare earths. So what we need to do is look at where do we have competitive advantage. There's a tendency for us to be a little bit overly effusive, but objectively speaking, there's a lot we do really well. There's a lot that should be able to work. We just need to make sure that the countries that we work with, and the United States is potentially a major customer for Australian critical minerals, understand that if they want security of long-term supply of some critical minerals, Australia is the most obvious place to come to. And for us at a Commonwealth level to start looking at what we can do to help with the economics of some of these projects which are potentially marginal.
Indeed, thanks, David. And when we think about the strengths that the Australian industry has from a research perspective and recovery perspective, we've got CSIRO and ANSTO,
Yep.
two world-leading organisations with regards to rare earths. But in our own backyard, we have the Upper Spencer Gulf with a great supply chain and great expertise. Dan, what's your perspective on how potentially those regions could be brought to bear in developing these resources?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the Upper Spencer Gulf is very close to some tremendous mining opportunity, or some existing tremendous mining projects and tremendous opportunities, and it also really is the heart of Australia and perhaps the world at the moment with regard to renewable energy generation. They fit very, very well together. We also, a few years ago, passed in our parliament the laws needed so that large-scale wind farms and solar farms could be built in our pastoral zone. So potentially closer to new mining opportunities. So you need water and electricity, one of the key things, apart from a resource and customers and finance, but
Yep.
you need water and electricity to start doing things physically. We also have an intention to, with industry, get an interconnector into New South Wales. So we're trying to be able to have that energy supply away from population, essentially, in areas where it's more welcome, to try and ease up some of those burdens. The other thing that I'd add to that too, connecting to what David just said, we are very focused on international markets. Now, I should have said at the start, everything government does is in partnership with industry. We're about being part of the conversation, setting the policies, the rules, the laws, trying to open up doors, but it's actually industry that does things, and that's an important thing for me to acknowledge. I've met with delegations from West Germany, South Korea, Japan, and the United States to try and encourage that sort of thing. But we are also doing everything we can to encourage demand within South Australia as well. We have brought 3 household battery assemblers and manufacturers into Adelaide. We are looking, very, very closely at the electronic vehicle aspect. There's a wide range of things that we're trying to do in South Australia, and I hope everybody is aware of the National Space Centre coming here. Now there's a enormous connection, submarines, so space, defence industries, battery manufacturing, electric vehicles, and others. So while there's a huge opportunity out in the world, we're actually trying to get more opportunities here for to connect to the high tech, to create more jobs, to have customers locally, not just overseas, so that you can, essentially broaden your portfolio. We're really trying to attack this from both ends and the middle, so that South Australia, unashamedly parochial, can get as many of these opportunities as possible.
That's fantastic, Dan. And Andrew, from your perspective, I think David's hit on probably the only application of blockchain that in my head makes sense in terms of end-to-end, because lots of the other stuff is just out there, at least from my understanding. But the presence of these other high-tech industries and this innovation hub at Lot 14 that we're hearing announcements about, MIT is going to have a base here. What opportunities do you think that offers for the resource sector?
Oh, look, I think it's incredibly, one of the most important things for this sector is resilience and health of other sectors. So a great economy should have diversity in employment and opportunity and revenue. That makes for a really diverse community. And sometimes the best people that we want to bring into our industry are not mining engineers directly out of university, but engineers or technicians or data science from other sectors, because that's how you get the diversity of thought and the continual challenge on the way we think and the way we work. So the fact that some of these other sectors are moving forward, I think, is fantastic for the resources sector.
That's right.
It provides a much more vibrant, resilient economy. It allows us to invest more in the state and in the city, which helps us attract new people to come and actually help us. So I think that's the very first point, is that it's really important. Things like space, which is sort of the topic of today, for me, I don't know where the space industry is going, and I'm not quite convinced myself whether we're going to quite get to Mars and mine and bring commodities back. But what it does do is it provides an excitement in high school students who want to go to university and learn technical subjects and get into the stream that we can pinch later on and bring into the resources sector. So that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
So that to me is fantastic. That if that just provides energy in high school to go and do subjects and get into university in these areas, that's positive, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, interest in STEM will then open up a future in multiple industries.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So from a... we've talked a lot about the great resources we have. We've talked about the infrastructure that we have. But there's also the amazing people, which we just touched on. I mean, Andrew, you and your company, you've been really engaging in delivering a different culture and a culture of innovation. What's the important piece of that puzzle? Many organisations try to embrace an innovative culture, but what's the key difference from you, and how do you measure its success?
It's a very hard question to answer. I think innovation is not a technical problem, it's a social problem, so it's about people. And one of the things that I've struggled with in our resource sector historically is that when we want to innovate, quite often we create a business improvement department or an R&D centre that sits on the side because it's too hard to get everybody in your business to innovate. And then we have multiple standards and procedures that tells everybody how to work within an inch of their life every minute of their day. So you don't actually create the real environment to innovate. So to create a true innovation culture, I think you've got to empower everybody in your business, not just the handful of people that you want to challenge what you're currently doing. But you've also got to change your systems, you've got to change your standards, you've got to create space for them, and you've got to have leaders that actually like being challenged and like being open to new ideas and encouraging that. So if you try and change all of those things, it's really hard. So that you've got to change multiple levers in your business at the same time to get it. You can't just say, we want you to innovate, because it won't happen, because all of our systems drive it the other way. So it's a very complicated problem, and I think you've got to start from the top, and you've got to actually change everything in your business to get it. And I wouldn't say we're anywhere near where we want to be, but we do see really interesting and great signs of people innovating. And we see people at our shop floor coming up with great ideas and actually making a change. And I think if you want to transform your business, you have to have a culture of innovation because they need to like change, ready for when you want to make something big happen. Otherwise, they'll be resistant and it just won't happen.
Yeah, indeed. And who did you learn from? Was there any particular organisations that you looked at to embrace how they've embraced an innovative culture, or is it working it out as you go?
Absolutely the latter. Lots of working it out as you go, lots of mistakes. But I would say there are sectors that are much better at innovating than the resources sector. So we benchmarked ourselves off companies like Amazon Web Services, companies like Netflix, and within this sector to more look at what not to do, I would say. But there are companies that have to innovate or die, and they innovate very, very quickly, and they're the sectors that we're trying to learn from. People say in our sector that we're slow, and I think we are. People say that because we build big billion-dollar assets, you can't use innovative and agile methodologies, and we think you can. It's more the mindset that's stopping us.
Fantastic. Dan, your view on what's the role of the education institution? We've got Flinders as a sponsor here. I know we have representatives from Adelaide Uni. How do the tertiary institutions create both the students but also the research to support the industry?
Hugely important partners. We have three tremendous sort of homegrown universities here in South Australia, and people might have noticed an announcement yesterday that the Premier and others in government have got MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to come to be part of Lot 14. Now, we're not trying to take any ground away from any homegrown people, but the more involved, the better in terms of trying to get results, to get innovation, and we know that tertiary institutions actually feed off each other very, very well. And the other thing that I've learnt by observation in the last 9 years as an MP, which I wasn't aware of before, how much collaboration there is between industry and tertiary institutions in South Australia and here in Adelaide particularly. It is very, very deep, in the energy and mining space, of course, but others as well. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Now, you asked about students as well, and I appreciated Andrew's analogy about get them excited about space mining and then turn them into regular miners. and look, and I agree with that. And it's okay, right? If space mining doesn't come along before that person needs a job, it doesn't actually matter whether they go to mining or space industry. Just get them excited about something. We are struggling at the moment with enrolments in some of these core areas that we need. So again, connecting to the need, you don't actually need to be an engineer or a geologist or something to make a massive contribution to a mining company, but we do need some of those people. We actually need those hardcore, centre skills, if you like, for the operations. We're not really seeing enough of that just at the moment in South Australia. But I think the innovation that the tertiary sectors are showing between themselves and with them and industry, and I say quite openly with them and government to a lesser extent, and that's not a criticism of universities. The government probably is not doing as much. I'm not saying nothing, but not as much as industry is with the universities, both trying very hard. We do need to translate that to enrolments so that we really can thrive. This is a great place to live. It's a great place to work, and there are huge opportunities. We just can't have a gap in the professional people coming through. So that's one of the things we have to address. It's not doom and gloom, but we need to deal with it.
I couldn't agree more, Dan, and we still have a net loss of graduates from the state every year as they pursue career opportunities outside. So whilst we look at the education, there needs to be jobs. For jobs to be prevalent and growing, there needs to be industry. So David, from your perspective, Austrade, there's a big focus there on building trade relationships. Yes. How do you see your organisation assisting business people who want to invest in the resource sector and grow their business? What opportunities are there?
Look, there's two things we do. One is we target investors and investment and technology from companies and countries where we see gaps in the Australian market. The other service provision of focus for us is helping Australian companies get offshore. So there's a really important trade function to what we do. It's about working with you. It's about identifying what your strategy is, which potential overseas market is of interest to you, but also where we think your capability would be most welcome, where you will be most competitive. And it's all about us trying to plug you into the right places. So our best clients are ones where we are reasonably, we provide the guidelines, we provide the advice, but the company is capable of taking the next step themselves. So in terms of broad service provision, that's what we do. I'd just like to go back to the point the Minister made though, because there's a really important thread here. Mention of space, but also mention of electric vehicle production. The consistent feedback we're getting from overseas investors is that we will build near, for example, lithium-ion battery investors will come here if there is potentially an electric vehicle industry, or if there is a huge need with regards to renewable energy or storage of renewable energy. Now, I'm a Victorian, we're connected to the same national electricity market. We have a considered interest in building stability, building firming capability into the renewable energy sector. The reason this connects is that if we do have state and territory-based aspirations, as the South Australian government does have, it means that we can better target investment. There's been a lot of talk about lithium-ion battery production in Australia because at a really simplistic level it makes sense. We have all the resources here. Why shouldn't we do it? Well, it's not as simple as that. A lot of lithium-ion battery investment is going into Europe adjacent to where they're setting up electric vehicle manufacturing capability. So we need to be thinking progressively around how we advance our own thinking in terms of industrial development, how we leverage off our institutions. CSIRO is an obvious one. We also have cooperative research centres. Unfortunately, both of these went to WA, but we've got the one on critical minerals and we have the one on lithium-ion batteries. It's really encouraging to hear that offshore technology institutions want to come here and to build a presence here. It also comes down to the issue around jobs. So if we can start collecting all of this information together, for us it better enables an agency like Austrade to target where the investment gap is. Where's the patent gap? What are we doing at a technology level here, but where's the patent we need, which we can own and we can plug in. So they all exist, and so I don't like the word ecosystem. I accidentally used it.
Whoops.
But there's a symbiotic relationship between all of these various things we're discussing, and I think it's really important to be mindful of the big picture.
And the same is very true of hydrogen as well, which is
Absolutely.
not so linked to mining, but is another perfect example of huge opportunities that have those challenges to get to.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there is one thing we need to add to this to make it successful, and that is the concept of partnerships. So one of the things that this sector I think is quite poor at is working together to work to a common goal. I think this sector, more so than probably any other sector, likes to go it alone. Each company goes it alone, and trying to get these organisations to work together to solve quite complex problems is difficult. We often use the word partnership, but I don't actually see very many partnerships actually occurring. They are more service provision agreements or contracts or other sort of forms. I think to make this sort of wicked problem actually work, you need a real partnership. And because we don't know what the endpoint looks like, and you don't know what the answer is going to be. So that requires trust and respect of the various groups working together to solve a common problem. And you can't do that in a contract. You have to do it in a much more open partnership type relationship.
And you think about value sharing in terms of that
Absolutely.
sort of outcome rather
Not
than one
negotiating
person.
to win, but negotiating to create value for everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Well, it's risk sharing and profit sharing in some extents as well, but very important. And I mean, if I could just chip in on that, there are a lot of obvious things like transport or water or electricity or whatever, but processing in South Australia, partnerships in processing between organisations that want to turn their discoveries into mines, I think is a huge opportunity in South Australia.
It was certainly a topic of discussion at the Copper to the World Conference a couple of weeks ago, where one of the barriers to entry for copper miners is the deep cover, and the other one is the presence of other impurities.
Yeah.
And bringing together and solving that problem together as an industry is a potential step forward for our future. That's fascinating. So, what is the when we bring this all together, we have the right ecosystem, we have the right resources. We still seem to come back to part of the challenge for us will be to get our local communities on board that this is the right thing to do. It's all very well to say for the good of the country, we need this processing facility in X or Y. How do you think we take that forward, Dan? I know you're particularly passionate about engaging communities.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Look, I really am, and as a country outback MP, a person who lives in a town of 200 people, it's every day for me, as well as being a minister who wants the sector to grow. We've set a very clear, very ambitious growth agenda that Premier Marshall has delivered at 3% growth. Every department that has an economic focus, and even the ones in the social areas, health and education, are all required to contribute towards that. I think we need to explain to the various sectors, sometimes the sectors that feel that they are competing against each other, that we all benefit from the growth. We've both said it can't be one or the other, has to be both, and you're quite right, you can just say it, but how do you get there? Well, even some of the most straightforward things, which most people in this room probably know, but not everybody, in the broader community appreciates. There's $1 billion of income to the state government in our current budget, our current 4-year budget process, from resources royalties, from mining and petroleum. $1 billion. Now, that's not so that Treasurer Lucas can sleep well at night. That's actually so that we can build schools, build hospitals, build roads, pay for police, pay for nurses, etc., etc., etc. And even the people who live and work and perhaps have no debt whatsoever, perhaps have been there for generations and want to stay there for generations, in the highest rainfall, best soil, farming areas of our state, they want a hospital, they want a police station, they want a school, quite understandably, as they should. I think government needs to take a role in that more than industry. We need to try and help people understand that mining is a significant contributor, not only to our broader economy and jobs and things, but actually to every town, every suburb in South Australia. Mining, there's not one person in the state that will not get a benefit from that $1 billion of income over the next 4 years. So and there are other examples I could come up with, but really appreciating the industry for more than the things we normally talk about. which are the jobs and the local suppliers and that sort of thing.
Thanks.
I completely agree with what the Minister said. I'd like to add another dimension to this. I don't think it's good enough for companies like ours to say we're going to build an asset and the benefits you're going to get are jobs and services, contracts and some taxes. That's not good enough, I don't think. It needs to be much more than that. And if the Minister said that he was going to put a road through my house in Nova Gardens, I'd probably be on the steps and asking you why, because I like my home. But that's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
Mining
Exactly.
companies go and plonk
Exactly
a mine in their backyards. And it's a very emotive topic, but we need to make sure that those types of things are dealt with fairly, openly, transparently and respectfully, and they're not disadvantaged, but at the same time they shouldn't stop progress as well. So it's a very complicated situation. So I don't think it's good enough to do what we've historically done as an industry and say that we're going to create jobs and that's the benefit. It needs to be much deeper than that.
I agree. And particularly with the view on innovation, and a lot of innovation comes through increasing productivity, which could result in fewer roles, particularly at the coalface. How do we look forward and create that business case to the farmer that helps them understand the value?
It's a very good question. I think it's a very difficult question as well. I think the first thing you need to do is ask questions and listen, not tell them what they think or what they feel or what they're going to get or not. And it's the same as with traditional owners. So land is a very complex thing because it's stacked with all sorts of interested parties, and they all have different connections to the land, they all have different views about the land, and you've got to try and navigate that minefield. So the first thing I think you have to do before you actually start suggesting you know what the answer is go and ask, what is their connection to land? And traditional owners I've found to be the most complicated because as a white fella sitting here, you go and ask the traditional owners how they think about the land, and it's completely foreign to me. And I don't really get it, but that's not the point. I don't need to get it. I need to respect it. So asking questions to understand how people relate to their land is really, really important. And quite often, if you treat them with respect, they'll treat you with respect. And if you don't take that step, they won't treat you with respect, and that's where the conflict comes in and the retaliation comes in.
I think also providing information in a way that the person that wants it is comfortable asking the questions as well, because all of us, we say, well, we're going to do the very, very best. I think this person will need all of this, so you come with all of this. Well, you might hit the mark or you might not, or there might be things the person doesn't really want to talk about. And one of the ways we're trying to address this in connection to the Mining Act is we took a commitment to the election at the agriculture industry's request to give the Small Business Commissioner the authority to help when we have these conflicts, to help the landholders. We delivered it and then were quickly told, well, that's no good to us at all because that's only after the conflict exists. But that we've got that, and I'm sure that will be good. So we're connected to the mining bill passing both houses of Parliament is a commitment that government, Department of Energy and Mining, will fund an advisory service in regions for landholders by an independent, delivered by an independent body, all over South Australia, a respected independent body, so that not only are we asking the questions, which of course we should be doing, and then trying to answer those questions openly and honestly and in a timely fashion, we're also just kind of leave the door open a bit to say, well, look, you go over there, ask somebody else who you know and trust and already engage with for other reasons. Go and ask them. We don't even have to know what you asked. We don't even have to know what the answers were. We set them up with the tools and the information so we can be pretty sure they're giving you the right answers. But it will be entirely your business what you ask, what they tell you, because people need to be able to be more comfortable with what's happening. And that won't solve everything, far, far from it, but it'll be one of the important foundations so that, harking back to, again, something that's been discussed, when somebody sees some social media campaign saying it's going to be all a disaster and, your kids are going to have 3 heads and whatever else, that you could actually go to, Rural Business Solutions, hypothetically, and say, look, can you tell me this, my cousin's neighbour was approached by a mining company. I'm thinking maybe they might come to our district one day. So you're getting this information before it's right on your doorstep. How does this work? How does this happen? I think that won't fix it, but it's a really good,
fundamental to
one
that,
of the key pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and fundamental to that will be the trust.
Exactly right.
So the those community members have to be able to trust that the
We
government is
give the
going to give them
resources.
independent advice.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that's right. We're just going to give them the money, essentially,
yeah.
and the training and a few other things
Yeah,
that they will
so
get.
skill up the community members to be able
They
to
will get the
resolve it.
answers from somebody else, not government.
Yeah, and I think that's the secret to sustainability is capability build within the communities so they can engage, because it's likely to be they're feeling a little, an uneven playing field. They're sitting across the suits or the high-vis, trying to negotiate for the best outcomes.
Even just comfort with the topic.
Yeah.
That's a good
indeed,
start.
Yeah, what does it actually mean?
Just on that, Jack, I mean, this is no surprise. In EY's annual mining risk survey for this year, social licence to operate went from 7 to 1. This is a national issue, but I think it's one where South Australia has some real advantages. This isn't being dragged down by coal, which is where it's being directed. As we mentioned over lunch, we had a by-election in Victoria for the seat of Batman, where the most important election issue was Adani. You're free of that. You're a leader in renewable energy. I think this is something which we all need to look at more closely from a corporate level, from a government level, but the time on this is now. And I think this is one state where you can potentially make some really good progress.
Thank you, David. And thanks to my panel. I think in summary, the resource industry generates $1 billion
In royalties.
In royalties.
$250 million a year.
There you go. So the future is there if we navigate this innovation, technology application as it presents itself and perhaps deliver rare earths to the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks.